You think silence is weakness. That's why you keep losing. You talk too much. Because silence makes you anxious. You feel ignored, unseen, out of control. So you speak to fill the gap, to remind the room you still matter. But here's the truth. The one who breaks silence first is the one who loses the frame. Because real power doesn't need noise. It doesn't need to explain. It doesn't ask for validation. It waits. It watches. It calculates. And when it speaks, it doesn't argue. It commands. But most people can't wait. They fill the room with opinions, with defense, with leakage. And in doing so, they expose themselves, their patterns, their triggers, their weaknesses. Meanwhile, the silent one, still, unmoved, dangerous. Because silence isn't passive. It's pressure. It's control. It's space that forces others to reveal themselves. That's why cold mind doesn't speak to be heard. It speaks to end the conversation. If you can't stay silent, you're not leading. You're leaking. Why the mind fears. Silence. Silence isn't comfortable. It's not calming. Not to the average mind. To most people, silence feels like disconnection, rejection, loss of control. Because silence doesn't give you anything to hold on to. No signals, no expressions, no tone, just space. And space makes the mind anxious. Why? Because the brain is addicted to feedback. It wants constant confirmation. Am I safe? Am I accepted? Do I still matter? And when someone goes silent, you lose that confirmation. Your brain enters guess mode. It starts creating stories. They're mad at me. I said something wrong. I'm losing them. None of it's real. But it feels real. Because your mind can't process blank space. So you react. You fill the silence. You talk. You explain. You apologize. You rush to close a gap that only existed in your head. But that reaction? That's what gives away your power. Because silence doesn't hurt you. Your fear of what it might mean does. You've been trained to think silence is rejection. That it signals something's wrong. That it must be fixed. But silence isn't negative. It's neutral. It only becomes pressure when you assign meaning to it. And that meaning always comes from inside you. From your insecurities, your past, your unmet need for validation. That's why cold mind treats silence like a mirror. It reflects who's actually centered and who's scrambling to protect their image. If silence breaks you, you don't own your presence. It owns you. You're leasing it through their gaze, because true presence doesn't beg to be seen. It waits to be felt. So next time someone goes quiet, don't react. Watch. Let the silence stretch. See what it brings out. If it breaks them, they were never in control. And if it breaks you, you just found your training ground. If you fear silence, you don't fear them. You fear the version of you that shows up when they stop talking. Noise is a loop. Silence breaks it. You don't just react, you repeat. Again, and again, and again. That's not awareness, that's programming. Most people live inside a loop, not because they choose it, but because they're too distracted to notice it. It starts with discomfort. Silence, uncertainty, a gap in attention. The mind panics, so it fills the gap with words, with noise, with movement, with distraction. You talk, you text, you over-explain, you justify, not because it's needed, but because you're running from stillness. And you call that communication. You call that being real. But cold mind calls it what it is: emotional leakage. You leak thoughts to avoid thinking. You leak emotions to avoid feeling. You leak validation-seeking phrases just to avoid the question, why do I need to say this at all? The brain rewards repetition. So the more you speak out of habit, the more that habit becomes your identity. You don't speak because it's strategic. You speak because the loop demands it. And when silence shows up, the loop malfunctions, and you panic. But here's the shift. Silence isn't the enemy of clarity. It's the enemy of compulsion. It forces the loop to break, to pause, to confront itself. That's why most people can't handle silence, not because it's empty, but because it's full of everything they've been avoiding. And if you can't sit in that space, you'll always react too early, say too much, and hand over control to the moment, to the person, to the loop. But if you can hold that space, even for 5 seconds, you didn't just break the loop, you broke the spell. And in that break, you became powerful again. Noise feels like expression, but most of the time, it's just your past speaking again. Cold silence. 3 rules that shift power. Without speaking, silence isn't passive. It's tactical. It's psychological redirection. In cold mind, we don't stay quiet to disappear. We stay quiet to control the pace, to unnerve the reactive, to shift gravity in a room. Here's how it works. 1. Silence disarms manipulation. Every manipulator needs one thing: your reaction. They bait, they provoke, they wait for you to respond emotionally so they can steer the frame. But when you go silent, the game stalls. No feedback, no fuel, no leverage. They start talking more, over-explaining, getting nervous. Why? Because they lost the mirror. And now, they're talking to themselves. Your silence pulls them out of control and into exposure. Not because you attacked, but because you withheld. That's not weakness. That's psychological judo. 2. Silence controls the rhythm. Power is about pace. The one who controls the tempo, controls the tone. Most people rush to fill gaps. They talk fast to avoid discomfort. They answer too soon, agree too quickly, apologize without clarity. Cold silence slows everything down. You pause, you breathe, you wait. And in that pause, everyone else starts recalibrating around you. It's subtle, but it's total. Suddenly, you're not reacting, you're conducting. 3. Silence forces the truth to surface. The truth doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes it just needs space to emerge. When you stop speaking, you stop protecting others from their own discomfort. You let them fill the silence, and in doing so, they expose their logic, their insecurity, their game. Cold mind doesn't confront directly. It invites implosion. No defense, no argument, just silence. Like glass that cuts if they look too long. The insecure will speak too much. The manipulative will overdisclose. The impatient will crack. You just sit. Still. Unreadable. Immovable. Because real control doesn't need to announce itself. It makes others reveal what they're trying to hide. Silence doesn't ask for power. It reprograms the room until power has no other option. He didn't say a word, and that's why he owned the room. They were waiting, watching, expecting him to speak, to defend, to respond. He didn't. He just sat there, still, present, quiet, and slowly. They started talking more, faster, louder. One person questioned him, another made assumptions. A third tried to provoke a reaction. Still, nothing. No smile, no shift in posture, no emotional tell. And that silence, it became uncomfortable. Not for him, but for them. Because the moment he refused to engage, he forced the room to face itself. Their assumptions collapsed. Their confidence cracked. They couldn't read him. So they started projecting. He must be hiding something. He must feel guilty. He must be intimidated. But none of that was true. They weren't seeing him. They were seeing their own mental noise, reflected back by someone who didn't need to speak to feel real. That's when it happened. They lost composure. Their statements turned emotional. Their arguments lost precision. They overreached, over-explained, overexposed. And he hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. But he already won, because his silence wasn't weakness. It was design. It was intentional control of the tempo. He didn't show up to speak. He showed up to absorb signal and let the room collapse under its own weight. That's the secret. Silence creates pressure, and pressure reveals truth. Not by asking questions, not by making points, but by giving others the space to unravel themselves. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud, it wasn't clever, it was controlled, short, unemotional, final. And in that moment, no one remembered what the others said. They only remembered the man who didn't say anything, until it mattered. If you can master the room without speaking, you've already won before words even arrive. Silence isn't absence, it's command without sound. They told you silence is passive, that it means weakness, insecurity, fear. But here's what they never taught you. Silence isn't retreat, it's domination, without the noise. You think people gain control by speaking first, by showing presence, by making an impression. But real presence isn't shown, it's felt. And silence, real, intentional silence, amplifies presence like nothing else. It forces the environment to shift around you. It bends the tempo. It forces attention into your orbit without demanding it. Because here's the truth. Most people lose control not when they're attacked, but when they feel ignored. And silence feels like being ignored, like being erased, like being unseen. So they react, speak faster, try harder, expose more. They break themselves just to escape the stillness you refuse to break. That's power. Not the kind that dominates with words, but the kind that makes the world speak first. And in that space, you don't just observe. You define the rules of engagement without saying a word. This is what cold silence really means. You don't seek permission to lead. You don't fight to be understood. You let the noise collapse. You let the moment spin, and you remain still at the center. Because silence isn't absence. It's weight. It's gravity. It's architecture without blueprint. Influence without movement. It doesn't ask to be followed. It makes following inevitable. You don't dominate the moment. You dissolve it by staying still.